Dr. Marcus Kane was 3 cups of coffee, deep into analyzing protein sequences when the proximity alarm screamed through his research vessel. The Mendel's dream shuddered as something massive dropped out of hyperspace directly above them, casting a shadow that turned the observation deck pitch black. "Computer, identify the contact," Marcus called out, his hands already moving to the emergency protocols. 3 years of war had taught every human in space to expect the worst. Contact identified. Zephyrian Hive-class Dreadnought Eternal Swarm. Mass, approximately 4 million tons. Weapons systems, active. Shield status, raised. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. The Eternal Swarm was a legend among human forces, a biomechanical nightmare that had personally overseen the glassing of New Geneva. Its living hull could regenerate from almost any damage, and its weapon systems had turned entire fleets into expanding clouds of superheated plasma. He was alone, in a research vessel with the defensive capabilities of a particularly aggressive butterfly. "This is Dr. Marcus Kane aboard the research vessel Mendel's Dream," he transmitted on all frequencies, his voice steadier than he felt. "I am a non-combatant conducting xenobiological research under the Terran Scientific Accords. Please state your intentions." The response came immediately, but not in the harsh, clicking language he expected. Instead, a translation matrix rendered the words in perfect, desperate English. "Dr. Kane, we surrender." Marcus stared at the communication panel, certain he'd misheard. "Repeat your last transmission." "We surrender, Dr. Kane. We require your immediate assistance. Our Queen Mother is dying." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Marcus had studied Zephyrian biology for the better part of a decade, first as an academic curiosity, then as a military necessity when the war began. He knew that the Queen Mother wasn't just their leader, she was their entire nervous system. Every Zephyrian was connected to her through quantum-entangled neural pathways. If she died, the entire species would revert to their pre-sentient state within hours. Billions of beings would become nothing more than sophisticated insects. "Dr. Kane," the voice continued, and Marcus could hear something he'd never associated with the Zephyrians before: fear. "We have monitored your research. You are the only human who has successfully interfaced with our neural architecture. We have 6 hours and 17 minutes before total cognitive collapse. Will you help us?" Marcus's mind raced. This had to be a trap. The Zephyrians were master strategists, capable of planning campaigns across decades. They'd never show weakness unless it served a greater purpose. But the desperation in that translated voice seemed genuine, and the implications were staggering. If the Queen Mother really was dying, and if he could somehow save her, what assurance do I have that this isn't an elaborate ruse to capture me? Marcus asked. "None," came the immediate reply. "We offer no guarantees of your safety. Dr. Kane, we can only tell you that if our Queen Mother dies, the war becomes irrelevant. There will be no Zephyrian collective to fight. Only empty shells drifting through space." Marcus closed his eyes and thought of New Geneva. 2 million colonists, gone in a matter of hours. His sister had been among them, along with her husband and their 3-year-old daughter. The rational part of his mind screamed that this was justice. Let the monsters who had started this war face extinction. But the scientist in him, the part that had dedicated his life to understanding alien biology, couldn't ignore the magnitude of what was happening. An entire species facing extinction. Billions of sentient beings about to lose everything that made them who they were. "I need to see proof," Marcus said finally. "Medical scans, neural readouts, something that confirms your Queen Mother's condition. Transmitting now." The data that flooded Marcus's systems was unlike anything he'd ever seen. The Zephyrian Queen Mother's neural patterns were displayed in 3-dimensional holographic detail, and even with his limited understanding of their biology, he could see the catastrophic damage. Entire sections of her consciousness were going dark, neural pathways collapsing like dominoes. It was as if someone was systematically erasing her mind, one memory at a time. "My God," Marcus whispered. "What's causing this?" "Unknown. Our greatest bioengineers have attempted every treatment protocol. Neural regeneration therapy, quantum consciousness transfer, even primitive surgical intervention. Nothing has slowed the degradation. We estimate complete neural collapse in 6 hours 14 minutes. Marcus studied the scans more carefully, his xenobiology training kicking in. The pattern of damage was too systematic to be natural disease, too precise to be random neural decay. Something was actively destroying the Queen Mother's mind. But what? "Dr. Kane," the Zephyrian voice interrupted his analysis. "We must inform you of something else. 3 years ago, when the war began, it was not by our choice. We were fleeing. Fleeing from what? We cannot explain over open channels. But we can tell you this. The entity that is killing our Queen Mother has already consumed 17 other species. If she dies, if our collective consciousness fails, nothing will stop it from spreading to the rest of the galaxy, including Earth." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. "You're saying this is bigger than our war?" "The war was a mistake, Dr. Kane. A desperate attempt to find a new home before the entity reached us. We chose poorly, and for that, we accept responsibility. But if you do not help us now, the mistakes of the past will become irrelevant. There will be no future for any of us." Marcus stared at the neural scans, his mind working furiously. The damage patterns were unlike anything in the xenobiological literature, but there was something familiar about them. Something that reminded him of his early research into human Zephyrian neural interfaces. "I need to come aboard your ship," Marcus said finally. "I need to examine the Queen Mother directly." "That is not possible. No alien has ever been permitted in the presence of the Queen Mother. The biological contamination risks alone." "Then she dies," Marcus interrupted. "And your species dies with her. And apparently, so does everyone else in the galaxy. Your choice." There was a long pause. Marcus could imagine the frantic consultations taking place aboard the massive dreadnought. The desperate calculations of beings facing the extinction of everything they'd ever known. "Very well. Dr. Kane, we are extending a docking tube. But understand, if you attempt any hostile action, if you carry any weapons or harmful substances, you will be eliminated instantly." "Understood." Marcus moved quickly through his ship, gathering the portable medical equipment he might need. His hands shook slightly as he sealed the diagnostic scanner into its carrying case. He was about to board an enemy vessel, to attempt something that had never been tried before. With the fate of multiple species hanging in the balance dot as the docking tube connected with a resonant thud, Marcus took a deep breath and stepped toward the airlock. Whatever was waiting for him on the other side, whatever had driven the Zephyrians to this desperate gambit, he was about to find out. The airlock cycled, and Marcus Kane stepped into the belly of the beast, carrying with him the last hope of two civilizations locked in a war that might have doomed them both. The interior of the Zephyrian dreadnought was nothing like Marcus had imagined. Instead of cold metal corridors, he found himself walking through what could only be described as living architecture. The walls pulsed with a gentle bioluminescence, and the floor beneath his feet felt warm and slightly yielding, like walking on skin. Organic conduits snaked along the ceiling, carrying nutrients and information through the ship's nervous system. His escort was a Zephyrian warrior caste, nearly 8 feet tall with 4 arms and compound eyes that reflected the corridor's soft light. The creature moved with fluid grace despite its size, its chitinous armor gleaming like polished obsidian. It hadn't spoken since Marcus boarded, communicating only through subtle pheromone releases that his translation device couldn't interpret. The bioship is beautiful, Marcus said, trying to break the oppressive silence. I've studied your technology for years, but seeing it in person. The warrior's head turned slightly, compound eyes focusing on him with unsettling intensity. When it spoke, the voice was different from the one that had contacted him, deeper, more resonant. You study us to kill us more efficiently. I studied you to understand you, Marcus replied. There's a difference, is there? Your species excels at finding new ways to destroy what you do not comprehend. Marcus couldn't argue with that assessment. The war had indeed spawned dozens of new weapons designed specifically to exploit Zephyrian biology. But it had also led to breakthroughs in understanding consciousness itself. Discoveries that might now save both their species. They passed through a membrane that dilated at their approach, entering a vast chamber that took Marcus's breath away. The Queen Mother's sanctum was a cathedral of living tissue, its walls rising hundreds of feet into darkness. Bioluminescent patterns flowed across the surfaces like slow lightning, and the air hummed with barely audible harmonics. At the center of the chamber, suspended in a crystalline cocoon the size of a small building, was the Queen Mother herself. Marcus had seen images and intelligence reports, but nothing had prepared him for the reality. She was magnificent and terrible, her body a fusion of insect and something far more alien. Her form shifted constantly within the crystal matrix, as if she existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Neural filaments extended from her body like silver threads, connecting to nodes throughout the chamber, and Marcus realized, to every Zephyrian in the fleet, but something was terribly wrong. Dark patches spread across her form like cancer, and the neural filaments flickered erratically. As Marcus watched, another section of her consciousness went dark, and he heard a collective gasp from the Zephyrians around him. She is dying faster now, said a new voice. Marcus turned to see what could only be a Zephyrian scientist caste approaching, smaller than the warrior, with enlarged cranial ridges and 6 delicate manipulator arms. Your presence accelerates the process. The entity feeds on new neural patterns. Entity? Marcus moved closer to the cocoon, his medical scanner already active. Show me what you're dealing with. The scientist gestured, and the chamber's walls came alive with holographic displays. Marcus found himself looking at something that defied classification, a writhing mass of what looked like living shadow, shot through with veins of sickly light. It moved through the Queen Mother's neural pathways like a parasite, but its behavior was too intelligent, too purposeful. We first encountered it 3 cycles ago, the scientist explained. It appeared in our outer territories, consuming the minds of entire colonies. Not killing them, that would be merciful. It leaves the bodies intact but empties them of everything that makes them who they are. The victims become hollow shells, aware but unable to think, to feel, to remember. Marcus studied the scans, his blood growing cold. How many species has it consumed? 17 confirmed. Possibly more. It learns from each mind it devours, becoming more sophisticated, more dangerous. When it reached our core worlds, we had no choice but to flee. And you came to human space because... The scientist's compound eyes dimmed. Because we were desperate. We needed new territory, new resources to fight this thing. We thought your species would be easy to displace. A pause. We were wrong. Marcus continued his scans, the pieces slowly falling into place. This entity, it's not biological, is it? It's something else entirely. We believe it to be a form of quantum consciousness, the scientist confirmed. It exists partially outside normal space-time, which is why our conventional weapons are useless against it. It can only be fought on the mental plane, consciousness against consciousness, and that's why you need me. Marcus looked up from his scanner. Human minds work differently than yours. We might be able to resist it. More than resist, said another voice. Marcus turned to see a figure approaching from the shadows, another Zephyrian. But this one was different. Older, with scars across its carapace and eyes that held depths of ancient wisdom. I am the Queen Mother's primary neural interface. I have been connected to her consciousness for 40 cycles. Through her, I have touched the entity directly. The scarred Zephyrian moved closer, its movements careful and deliberate. The entity is ancient, Dr. Kane, older than our civilization, older than most stars. It has consumed thousands of species across the galaxy, each one adding to its knowledge and power. But there is something it has never encountered. What? Chaos. Marcus frowned. I don't understand. The interface gestured toward the Queen Mother. Every species the entity has consumed shared certain characteristics. Ordered thought patterns, logical progression of ideas, predictable neural pathways. Even in their diversity, they all thought in fundamentally similar ways. But humans, the creature's eyes fixed on Marcus with laser intensity. Humans are different. Your minds are chaos given form. You think in contradictions, hold opposing ideas simultaneously, create meaning from randomness. The entity cannot predict you because you cannot predict yourselves. Marcus felt a chill of understanding. You want me to interface directly with the Queen Mother's consciousness. To fight this thing on its own ground. Yes, but understand the risks, Dr. Kane. If you fail, the entity will consume your mind as well. And through you, it will learn to understand human thought patterns. Your entire species will become vulnerable. Marcus stared at the dying Queen Mother, watching the dark patches spread across her form. Around the chamber, he could see Zephyrian technicians monitoring readouts, their movements becoming more frantic as their leader's condition deteriorated. How long do I have? Minutes, the scientist said grimly. The cascade failure has begun. Once it reaches the primary consciousness nodes, the process becomes irreversible. Marcus closed his eyes, thinking of his sister, of New Geneva, of the billions of humans who had no idea their fate might rest in the hands of a xenobiologist who'd never fired a shot in anger. Then he thought of the Zephyrians around him, facing the extinction of everything they were, everything they'd ever been. What do I need to do? The neural interface moved to a control panel, its manipulator arms dancing across organic switches. We will create a direct neural link between you and the Queen Mother. You will experience her consciousness as if it were your own, feel what she feels, know what she knows. And you will face the entity that is killing her. And if I can't stop it? The interface paused in its preparations. Then we all die, Dr. Kane, every thinking being in the galaxy. The entity will spread from mind to mind until there is nothing left but empty shells drifting through space. Marcus nodded grimly and moved toward the interface chair that was rising from the chamber floor. Then I guess failure isn't an option. As the neural connectors descended toward his skull, Marcus Kane prepared to dive into an alien mind and face a horror beyond human comprehension. The moment the neural connectors touched Marcus's skull, reality exploded into fragments of impossible sensation. He was no longer Dr. Marcus Kane, he was the Queen Mother, feeling the weight of billions of minds pressing against his consciousness like a vast ocean of thought. Every Zephyrian in the fleet was there, their hopes and fears flowing through him in torrents of raw emotion. But beneath it all, something else moved. Something hungry. Marcus felt it immediately, a presence that was fundamentally wrong, like a discordant note in a symphony of minds. The entity slithered through the Queen Mother's consciousness with predatory grace, leaving trails of emptiness in its wake. Where it passed, memories died. Personalities dissolved. The very essence of what made the Queen Mother who she was simply ceased. You are new. The entity spoke without words, its voice like the sound of stars dying. Your patterns are unusual, no matter. You will feed me as the others have. Marcus tried to respond, but found himself overwhelmed by the alien nature of the Queen Mother's mind. Her thoughts moved in geometric patterns that human consciousness wasn't designed to process. He was drowning in an ocean of ordered, hierarchical thinking. His chaotic human mind struggling to find purchase in the crystalline structure of Zephyrian consciousness. The entity struck without warning. Tendrils of living shadow wrapping around Marcus's awareness. He felt it probing his memories, tasting his thoughts, and for a terrifying moment he understood what the consumed species had experienced. The entity didn't just kill, it unraveled the very concept of self, leaving behind hollow shells that remembered being alive but could no longer understand what that meant. Fascinating. The entity purred as it explored Marcus's mind. Your species thinks in spirals and contradictions. You hold opposing truths simultaneously. How do you function with such disorder? That's when Marcus realized what the neural interface had meant about chaos. The entity was trying to map his thought patterns, to understand and consume them as it had countless others. But human minds didn't follow the logical pathways it expected. Marcus thought of his sister's laugh, of the way she could be furious and loving in the same moment. He thought of jazz music, of abstract art, of the beautiful impossibility of human emotion. The entity recoiled as if burned. What is this? Your thoughts have no structure, no order. How can consciousness exist in such chaos? Marcus smiled within the shared mind space and began to fight back, but not in any way the entity could have anticipated. Instead of trying to match its logical assault with ordered resistance, he flooded the connection with pure human randomness. He thought of every paradox he'd ever encountered, every contradiction that made humans beautifully, impossibly human. He thought of love and hate existing in the same heart, of the way humans could be simultaneously selfish and selfless, cruel and kind, logical and completely irrational. He thought of poetry that made no sense but conveyed perfect meaning, of music that followed no rules but moved souls to tears. The entity writhed in confusion, its tendrils loosening their grip. This is not consciousness. This is madness. No, Marcus said, his voice echoing through the Queen Mother's dying mind. This is humanity. He pressed his advantage, diving deeper into the chaotic core of human thought. He shared memories of children's laughter, of lovers' quarrels that ended in passionate reconciliation, of the way humans could find hope in the darkest circumstances and despair in the brightest moments. He showed the entity the beautiful contradiction of human creativity, the way they could destroy and create with equal passion. Often simultaneously, the entity began to fragment, its ordered consciousness unable to process the magnificent chaos of human thought. But Marcus realized that simply confusing it wasn't enough. The thing was ancient, powerful, and it would eventually adapt. He needed to do more than just resist. He needed to change the very nature of the battlefield, drawing on his connection to the Queen Mother. Marcus began to share his chaotic thought patterns with her dying consciousness. At first, she resisted, the ordered Zephyrian mind recoiling from the anarchic nature of human thought. But as the entity continued its assault, she began to understand your chaos. It burns the shadow thing, the Queen Mother's voice whispered through their shared consciousness. But I cannot think as you do. My mind is not built for such disorder. Then let me teach you, Marcus replied. Not to think like a human, but to think like yourself, but with human chaos as a weapon. He began to show her how to introduce controlled randomness into her thought patterns. Not enough to destroy her ordered consciousness, but enough to create pockets of unpredictability that the entity couldn't map or consume. It was like teaching someone to paint with their non-dominant hand, awkward at first, but creating unexpected beauty. The Queen Mother began to understand, her vast consciousness adapting with surprising speed. She started thinking in spirals instead of straight lines, holding contradictory ideas in perfect balance. The entity, which had been steadily consuming her memories, suddenly found itself unable to predict where her thoughts would go next. What are you doing? The entity demanded, its voice now tinged with something Marcus had never expected to hear from it. Fear. This is not how consciousness works. This is not how minds function. Maybe not where you come from, Marcus said, feeling the Queen Mother's strength beginning to return. But this is how we work. Humans and Zephyrians together. Order and chaos in perfect, impossible harmony. The Queen Mother's consciousness began to pulse with new energy, her thought patterns now a hybrid of Zephyrian logic and human unpredictability. The entity's tendrils, which had been steadily draining her essence, suddenly found nothing to grasp. Every time it tried to map her thoughts, she would shift into a new pattern, guided by the beautiful randomness Marcus had shared with her. But Marcus realized they could do more than just save the Queen Mother. Through her neural network, they could share this hybrid consciousness with every Zephyrian in the fleet. The entity had consumed 17 species by learning to predict their thought patterns. But a species that could think in both order and chaos, logic and randomness, would be immune to its tions.no. The entity screamed as Marcus and the Queen Mother began broadcasting their hybrid consciousness through the neural network. You cannot do this. Order must be preserved. Chaos must be contained. Why? Marcus asked, genuinely curious even as he felt the entity beginning to dissolve. What are you so afraid of? For a moment, the entity's true nature was revealed. It wasn't just a predator, it was a force of absolute order, a cosmic principle that sought to reduce all consciousness to predictable, consumable patterns. Chaos wasn't just its weakness. It was its antithesis, the one thing in the universe it couldn't understand or control. I am. Ending, the entity whispered as it began to fragment completely. But others will come. The universe tends toward order, toward entropy. Chaos is temporary. Order is eternal. Maybe, Marcus said as he felt the entity's presence finally fade from the Queen Mother's mind. But as long as there are humans in the universe, there will always be chaos. Beautiful, impossible, life-giving chaos. The neural connection began to fade, and Marcus found himself back in his own body, gasping and shaking in the interface chair. Around him, the Zephyrians were stirring as if waking from a long dream, their eyes bright with new understanding. The Queen Mother's voice echoed through the chamber, stronger than it had been in cycles. Dr. Kane, you have given us something we needed. Not just survival, but a new way of being. We are no longer purely Zephyrian, nor are we human. We are something new. Marcus smiled weakly, exhaustion washing over him. The war is over, the Queen Mother confirmed. How can we fight a species that has saved us from extinction, that has taught us to think in ways we never imagined possible? As Marcus was helped from the interface chair, he realized that humanity had won something far greater than a military victory. They had created the first truly hybrid consciousness in galactic history, a fusion of order and chaos that could resist any force that sought to reduce thinking beings to mere patterns. The galaxy would never be the same. And that, Marcus thought with a tired smile, was beautifully, chaotically human.